So hello everyone. Thanks. I can see there are many people on board. That's nice to see. So I will just make a very quick introduction. So as you know, DRYvER is over. So we are giving here our final webinar after 4 years of intensive effort. Margot, you can go to the next slide, please. Just to perhaps just go. Margot, tu t'allais trop vite. Passe. Voilà, merci. So one of the major output of DRYvER, and the first to come was in 2021. You probably know this map is the fact that we demonstrated that non-perennial rivers, intermittent river, temporary river, etc. Let's call them non-perennial river, are more abundant on Earth than perennial river. Now you can show the picture, Margot. So basically, everywhere you go on Earth, on every climate, including polar climate, alpine climate, but also tropical climate, you will find dry section of rivers everywhere, including in the UK. I can see Rachel is in the room, and she can attest that they have many non-perennial rivers while it's quite rainy over there usually. So you can go to the next slide. This is important because all the river science, Margot, if you can, all river science has been built on perennial flow. The hydrology, of course, but the ecology, the biogeochemistry, including the ecosystem services, the management, everything is biased toward, let's say, less than half of the river network. So that's quite an important shift in river science. And I'm happy that in DRYvER, we have started to demonstrate this paradigm shift. You can go to the next slide. So basically, our point, and that's how we built the proposal, and that's what you will see today, is that every river network should be seen as arrays of perennial and non-perennial segments that are connected, not always, depending on flow condition, groundwater level. So basically, what we've been seeing in ecology, the development of the meta-system approach is basically very appropriate for rivers. So a river network is exactly like you see on the Touarettes. That's a small river catchment that is also in a very wet place in France. And you can see blue, well, actually, Lotic should be blue. There is a problem here. Yellow when it's Atlantic, so there is water but no flow, or red, it's completely dry. And every day, basically, the spatial mosaic of habitat is changing, sometimes with strong connectivity, sometimes with no connectivity. Perhaps, Margot, on the two small figures, you can click. There are videos that will show people time-lapse of what's going on. If you just put one camera and take a picture of it, the second is the same. You can also launch it maybe, just as an illustration. And this is really important because the fact there is such a strong hydrological variability is basically changing the way we consider the distribution of species, processes, function, and services in river network. And of course, this cascades into how we should manage river network. You can go to the next slide. That's the last one for this introduction. Just it's not the last one. Just to tell you that was on current situation, but the first analysis that have been made at continental scale, like in Europe or in North America, we have shown that there is a strong increase towards more intermittency. In some cases, less, typically in glacial stream because of glacial melting. Some intermittent rivers are becoming perennial. In the Mediterranean area also because of water usage, we are turning intermittent river perennial, but in general, there is a strong signal showing increase in flow intermittence. So what I just said will be even more true in the future. And now you can go to the next and last slide. It's just to present you what was the purpose of DRYvER. So compared to previous projects in Europe that have focused on intermittent river, including some I can see in the audience, many of you contributed. Here, DRYvER has decided to move from the parochial intermittent river study to say, okay, but they're everywhere. So let's do river science without focusing on intermittent rivers, but showing that intermittent rivers are everywhere and they have a key role in river ecology. So we did that by translating climate projection into change in flow intermittence pattern at multiple scales, including 9 strategically selected DRN. You will hear DRN a lot, drying river network. It just took pictures this idea that a river network has always dry section, at least in the headwater if you want. Then we use the dynamic meta-system perspective, meta-population, meta-community, meta-ecosystem, meta-ecosystem services to understand the cascadic change of this change in flow intermittence in biodiversity, ecosystem function, and service, and then integrate all this knowledge into a multi-criteria decision framework that combines scientific management, socioeconomic, legislative barrier, and leverage to promote the adaptive management of drying river networks. So basically, what I said was in this high-level conceptual model with the different work package. So now you will hear about hydrology, the work package in blue that was the physical background and basis of DRYvER, how change in hydrology cascade into biodiversity, work package 2. I will make this presentation on the behalf of Nuria Bonada, who could not make it today. Then Rubén is going to present us how this has impact on ecosystem function. And then work package 4 will focus on ecosystem services. And the last work package, the integration of this knowledge into a management work package will be presented. I'm done. So I hope you will enjoy this presentation. I will give the floor to Louise Mimeau, who is leading the hydrology work package 1.
Thank you very much, Thibault, for this introduction. So I will start presenting the work of the hydrology work package, from which which gathered many contributors, and the scientific questions we try to answer in this hydrology work package are: so first, what are the spatio-temporal patterns of flow intermittence in the 9 studied DRNs at continental and at continental for the present climate? Also, what are the main drivers of flow intermittence, and what are the possible future evolutions of flow intermittence under climate change scenarios? And to answer these questions, we had to tackle some scientific challenges, such as the nature and the quantity of data that are necessary to characterize flow intermittence patterns, but also the uncertainties associated with modeling flow intermittence, and challenges related to the changes in scale, so both for upscaling, for example, from local observations to large-scale analysis, and downscaling from large-scale climate to flow intermittence at the reach level. Next, please. So I will start presenting the hydrological modeling at the European DRN scale. So in order to produce a projection of flow intermittence under climate change scenarios, we implemented a hybrid model to predict flow intermittence at high spatial and temporal resolution in the study sites. So this hybrid model relies on a spatially distributed hydrological model, which is coupled to a random forest model trained with flow intermittence observations that were collected in the 6 European study sites. And this model allows to simulate daily flow conditions, meaning flowing or dry, for every reach of the river network. So the first step was to calibrate and train the flow intermittence models separately for each of the 6 study sites, and then use them to reconstruct the flow intermittence patterns under past and present climate, and then simulate projections of the flow intermittence under climate change scenarios. And for the projections, we used 3 greenhouse gas emission scenarios, from a low emission scenario to a very high emission scenario. And the last step was to analyze the evolution of flow intermittence indicators that was specially designed to respond to DRYvER's interdisciplinary studies. Next, please. So basically, these flow intermittence models allows to extrapolate from local and discontinuous local observations of flow intermittence to simulated flow intermittence patterns in the river networks. The maps on the lower panel, they show the simulated mean annual number of dry days under the present climate. And we can see that there are contrasted flow intermittence patterns between the study sites. For example, in the Finnish DRN, the flow intermittence is confined to the small tributaries, whereas it is widespread for the Spanish DRN. And for the French DRN, flow intermittence is more located in karstic or highly permeable areas. Next, please. So as I said before, then the hydrological model was used to simulate some future projection of flow intermittence. And the figure on the left, it shows the projected evolution of the mean annual proportion of the river networks that are intermittent for the three greenhouse gas emission scenarios in the future that you can see with the three colors compared to the reference historical period in gray. And on the right, the figure shows the projected evolution of the seasonal pattern of flow intermittence, again for the 6 study sites and for the 3 greenhouse gas emission scenarios at horizon 2080s, and compared with the seasonal pattern of flow intermittence for the historical period. So I will not go into very much detail about these two figures, but the main thing that we can see is that for all the study sites and for the 3 greenhouse gas emission scenarios, we can see a projected increase in the future period of flow intermittence, even for the low emission scenarios, and with different intensities of increase from one DRN to another. Next, please. So the key messages here are that the projections indicate an intensification of drying across the 6 river networks, and particularly during the summer months. They also indicate an extension of the intermittent season with drying events that start earlier in the year and persist longer until late autumn. We also have some results that show that some small tributaries of the Finnish river networks that could start shifting from a perennial to an intermittent flow regime by the horizon 2050s, and the other river networks, except the French DRN, are projected to undergo similar transition and extending to larger tributaries and even to the main river sections in the longer term. And the final main result was that extreme drying events that usually occur on average 1 every 10 years in the present time period, they could become frequent by the 2050s and then become the norm by the 2080s. Next, please. So regarding the 3 South American study sites, here the main activities were to collect meteorological, geochemical, and hydrological data that were very helpful to better characterize the flow intermittence patterns in these 3 study sites. For the Brazilian study sites, there were also some simulations of future projection of flow intermittence. Here, the key messages are that the analysis of the collected data in the Ecuadorian DRN showed that for this study site, geology is the main driver of flow intermittence. Regarding the Bolivian DRN, the results showed that the El Niño phenomenon plays a major role on flow intermittence interannual variability. And regarding the Brazilian DRN, the simulated projections indicate that there is a risk of future amplification of flow intermittence with an extension of the dry rainy transition season. Next, please. So I will finish by presenting the hydrological modeling at the European scale, at the continental scale, sorry. And to predict flow intermittence at the European scale, the first step was to downscale stream flows that were simulated with the model water gap at a large spatial resolution, as you can see on the 2 upper figures, to a high resolution river network, as you can see on the lower figures, under the present climate. And this downscaling was done both for Europe and South America. The second step was to build some predictive models of stream flow intermittence for the European continent. And to do that, 2 random forests were used, one to predict in each reach of the European river network which months are perennial or non-perennial under the present climate, and the second one to predict for the non-perennial months how many days are actually no-flow days. And then the last step was to produce the future projection under climate change scenarios. Next, please. So here, the map on the right is a result of the first 2 steps and shows the percentage of months with at least 1 no-flow day under the present climate, so for the period going from 1981 to 2019. And the model estimates that under the present climate, 17.2% of all reaches and 3.8% of all European reach months were non-perennial. Next, please. And these are the results of the future projection of flow intermittence at the European continental scale. So the map on the left shows the percentage of non-perennial months for the historical reference period, which here goes from 1985 to 2014. And the maps in the middle and in the right, they show the changes in the percentage of non-perennial months under high emission scenarios by the horizon 2050s and 2080s. So here the result shows that there is a projected increase of flow intermittence in Europe, and with a very strong increase for the southern part of Europe around the Mediterranean region. And by the 2080s, and under the high emission scenarios, non-perennial reach time months are expected to increase from 3.5% to 4.8%, which represent actually an increase of 36% compared to the reference period. Next, please. So here the key messages are that in Europe, the number of non-perennial reach time months is projected to increase in the future for both high and low greenhouse gas emission scenarios and in almost all climate zones, and in particular in August and September. However, this result must be taken with caution, because we also realize that the random forests that are used to make these predictions strongly depend on the characteristic of the gauging stations that are used to train them, and this actually also applies for the modeling at the DRN scale. So to conclude, the projection indicate a general increase of flow intermittence for all the study areas, both DRNs and Europe, and for all greenhouse gas emission scenarios, but with regional variations. In Europe, the projections show a special extension of flow intermittence with an intensification of drying during the summer season and with more frequent extreme drying. And mainly here, my main message is that mitigating climate change by achieving a low emission scenario will strongly reduce the projected changes. Thank you.
Thanks, Louise. So I will make the presentation that I prepared with Nuria on her behalf. So Nuria Bonada from University of Barcelona, Catalonia, Spain, was leading work package 2. So the objective of this work package, as you understood from the introduction, had first a conceptual component, because we needed to understand how drying could have local and regional effect on biodiversity. So the first step was to develop a conceptual and mathematical model that represents the dynamic trajectory of meta-communities in drying river network. Then to test using a huge data collection effort whether this model makes good prediction or not. Test the genericity of the meta-community response to drying by exploring the response across the 9 drying river network that Louise I show you, including 3 in South America with very different climate and biogeographical settings. And last, to predict future biodiversity scenario, identify drying threshold that should not be crossed to maintain biodiversity in drying river networks. This is what we often call safe operational spaces. Next slide, please, Margot. So first, our modeler in DRYvER, they developed a theoretical model, a meta-community model based on theoretical river network, playing with drying, whether it should be random in a river network, it should be focused on upstream section or downstream section. And then they calculated different indices of connectivity. And they looked at theoretical species using true life history trait to see how drying would theoretically influence species richness. So you can see, for example, in this plot, the fact that in general drying intensity is decreasing species richness, but this of course depends on the dispersal mode of organism. For example, flying organisms, they can cope better with drying because of course they can escape the drying section and recolonize afterwards. You can change the slide, Margot. They also looked at drying decreases and community recovery. And what's interesting here is that the spatial location of drying event has absolutely no effect. Basically, what has an effect is the connectivity loss. If we reach more than 80% of drying section being dry, so that's quite huge, but it happens in some of our river network. Then we just have a major biodiversity collapse without possible recovery. So that's quite important to keep in mind. Of course, the shape of these responses depend again on the type of dispersal mode, drifting, swimming, and flying. Flying organisms, again, have a higher recovery capacity from drying events than drifting organisms, but this is not depending on the spatial pattern. So no, you can stay there, that's fine. So here you can, no, on the next one, please. Here. So I don't repeat what we said about the different drying river networks studied, but here is just to say that what we did is collect all type of organisms from biofilm to fish and macroinvertebrates at 5 different sampling dates for 9 drying river network. And each drying river network was a meta-community approach, so we had 20 sampling sites. So that just gives you an idea of the intense sampling effort we did, and also for fish that was it was intense in the field, but easy to sort in the field because species are not so numerous. But then you can imagine, and thanks Zoltán and his colleague, we had a lab dedicated for 2 years just sorting and identifying I don't know how many hundreds of thousands specimens of organisms from invertebrate and for the biofilm that was used by metabarcoding. Next slide, please. So basically, we are starting, you probably noticed that we have published more than 30 papers already, but many papers are still ongoing, especially this one, because the relationship between drying and the different types of community are quite complex. And we really want to make major progress here and not publish this type of relationship without understanding what's behind. For example, here you can see the regular shape of decreasing biodiversity when drying increase. Here drying is expressed as the number of days without flow water for the months before sampling. And you can see, for example, for fungi, sediment fungi and biofilm fungi, that's increased. So typically here we know, and we have to dig in that some fungi are semi-aquatic or even terrestrial, and they do behave like it's like a soil being in formation. So we really want to understand the mechanism behind those plots. But you can still see that there is some consistency, which also was found by our colleagues before, that there is such a strong effect of drying that basically all community seems to respond the same, whether you are in South America or in Finland, Spain, or in Hungary, for example. Next slide, please. What is also interesting is to do this South American-Europe comparison. Part of that was published last month by a paper in Global Change Biology by Danny, if you know him. That's quite a good paper. Basically, we found similar responses for alpha diversity between Europe and what we call CELAC, South American country. So basically the pattern for family or at the EPT level, the richness is always higher in perennial than in intermittent section. This we know. That's true in Europe. That's also true in South America, why we could have expected a different pattern because of the flashiness of the flow regime there, because of the different biogeographical history, no glaciation, etc. The fact that there is the flood pulse concept that emerged from South American river. We could have expected species to be more adapted to drying because they have flooding and drying season every year since I don't know how many hundreds of years, but basically no. Next slide, please. What's interesting is that we do find differences in terms of beta diversity. We have an increase in beta diversity in Europe in drying section. This is also something that's quite new, but still needs to be investigated further. Why? Of course, synoptically, we have different successional stage in one river network. So if we look at differences between communities, we may have a higher beta diversity, but then is it good or bad? We need to find out whether it's nestedness or it is turnover, and this is not quite clear. What we have found for sure is that there are different patterns for South America with a beta diversity that is higher and driven by nestedness in South America. So here we are also investigating the processes that are behind, because that's quite exciting to see these large-scale differences. Next slide, please. So then we have projected that. That's also ongoing. So that's very preliminary result. Projected that, the taxonomic richness, comparing the current period to the future period that Louise and colleagues have modeled. And what we found is we are going to have less diversity in macroinvertebrate communities. That's what's shown here. We do the same for fish and microbes, of course. There's an increased richness of biofilm bacteria diversity and contrasted change in sediment bacteria. For example, in some case, in Hungary, it will decrease a lot and increase in Finland. Again, that's pattern. We need to understand what's going on. So we need more work to identify what species is driving what, etc. What we found out is that Hungary is the most vulnerable, and perhaps Zoltán will correct me, but this could be due to the fact that drying is more recent and more severe in Hungary. So there is kind of, it's like if you are intermittent for like 100 years and then you become more intermittent, you may not cross the same tipping point as if you have a network that is almost perennial but is rapidly, quickly becoming intermittent. It's not only due to climate change, and it's also global change, pumping, water abstraction, etc. So perhaps that's what we are finding out here. We will investigate this further. Next slide, please. So we also identify spatially, because that's very important for manager to identify where do we have priority area where we should conserve or restore biodiversity, for example, to make sure that hydrological connectivity will not collapse. So we identify vulnerable reaches based on future drying pattern. This year for invertebrates, here, I won't go into the details. That's the 6th river network in Europe, because that's the one that for which physical distributed, especially hydrological model were developed by Work Package 1. And you can see that we did identify sites for which the anomaly in diversity in the future will be very high, which means if you want to conserve biodiversity, you should put effort now in this reach rather than putting effort in that reach, for example. So that's quite interesting for manager. And the next, and I think the last slide for Work Package 2, Margot, is about defining SOS, safe operational spaces. So what we did here is to define a threshold that should not be crossed if we want to maintain at least 30% of the maximum diversity value of perennial reaches. Get that in mind, because it's quite difficult to define what is a safe operational species. So here, we don't want to lose. We want to maintain at least 30% of what is currently in perennial reaches. And even if this seems to be crazy, you can see that for most of the drying river network presented here, we will cross this threshold very quickly. So that's quite scary. For example, these spaces are very, very narrow in Spain, and future drying prediction will go far beyond this threshold. Hungary and France have larger space operational spaces, but the future projection and prediction of biodiversity indicate that there will be crossed in the future. First in Hungary, as I say, more sensitive, and then in France. So that's quite scary, and that's a very bad scenario for riverine biodiversity. And I think that was my last slide, Margot. So I might give the floor to Rubén for the Work Package 3.
All right, here I am. Thanks all for the introduction. All right, so put all the nice logos.
Rubén, I think you have a problem with your microphone. I cannot hear you completely.
Can you cannot?
We can hear you sometimes, but like it's cutting.
It's cutting a lot.
Oh.
Right, we don't hear you now.
Okay, let me try.
No.
We can't hear you.
No. Now?
Yes, now, right now,
yes.
Can
you hear me? No.
Yes.
Now you can hear me. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay, I hope it's work. If you cannot hear me well, you just let me know, all right?
Okay.
Okay, sorry for this interaction. So
we can't hear you.
No.
No.
What about now?
Yes.
No, yeah, it's better.
Okay, fingers crossed. I'm very sorry. It was working before. All right. So just starting over again. I really would like to introduce some of the main findings or some of the examples that we found in Working Package 3 about how drying at the river network scale can affect ecosystem functioning. Okay, there has been a huge work effort done in this working package. We cannot obviously put everything in just 10 minutes or even 9 now, maybe. But anyway, let's try my best. So as Thibault was explaining very well in the beginning, we do know that intermittent or non-perennial river networks are everywhere in the world. Most of the river networks are already affected by drying. And obviously, as Thibault was just showed, this drying has a huge impact on communities and therefore on ecosystem functions, right? So next slide, please. So the thing is that about ecosystem functioning, most of the work that has been done before has been focusing on the, let's say, the temporal side on drying, or the temporal influence of drying on the ecosystem functions at the rich scale, right? But wait, we are working at the river network scale, or we should be working at the river network scale, because as Thibault was explaining, river networks are meta-ecosystems where different reaches are connected by flow. But what happens if we have a drying event? That this drying is going to create a temporal barrier, breaking the network, right? And it's going to fragment the network. And obviously, this is going to affect strongly both, for instance, the transport of resources, as can be leaf litter. If the river is dry, then leaf litter that was flowing in the water will just stop and accumulate on dry river beds. But the same happens with individuals, no? With consumers. Like, for instance, if you are a bacteria or a fungi that you disperse by flow, then if there is a drying event, this will break or will stop you to get dispersed downstream. No? There are organisms like microinvertebrates that have active dispersal, and maybe they can they can jump these sort of barriers, or maybe when the river is reconnected again, then the dispersals start over, no? And the movement of transport of resources, of leaf litter or nutrients start over, no? But we need to see this effect of flow intermittency or drying at the network scale, right? So this is what we were aiming in Working Package 3. Next slide. So if we want to understand what are the drivers of ecosystem functioning in river networks, we need to understand not only what's going on at the reach scale, what is going on with communities living in those reaches, or what are the conditions there, but we need to work and we need to understand what are the regional factors shaping local conditions, right? We need, and especially in this context of drying river networks, we need to understand what's the effect of this spatiotemporal fragmentation on both environmental conditions and communities, and therefore see what's going on with ecosystem functions in this context. So this is what we did in Working Package 3. You can go to the next slide. I'm going to present just just a quick summary of the methods. I don't want to put much on this because Thibault already mentioned. Instead of 5 campaigns, we had only 3. Looking for different seasons, we were working at dry and both dry and wet habitats, and we were looking at 3 particular functions that are related to carbon cycling, that are stream metabolism, greenhouse gas emissions, and leaf litter decomposition. Now, yes, we can go to some examples of how drying can affect ecosystem functions, and we start with the first function. Next slide, please. That is stream metabolism. Okay, so this work was, or the task of stream metabolism was very nicely led by people in Cantabria. But this sample here is a second study that was focused just on the Albany network, where they could do a long-term data analysis on metabolism and the effect of drying that was led in this case by INRI. So here in the Albany, we could study how drying can affect the metabolism at the long term, at least at a GR scale. And they found that drying really affects stream metabolism, so gross primary production and ecosystem respiration, both due to direct and indirect impacts of drying. Okay, so drying created or had a positive direct impact on ecosystem respiration, increasing respiration because of drying, mainly because of this accumulation of organic matter when the rivers get dry, that then is suddenly respired when the water gets back. But in the case of gross primary production, the impact of drying was not direct, but indirect, okay? Because it was mediated through changes in local conditions of the environment, but very especially on changes caused by drying in the microbial community, okay, in the algal community. So this created a negative indirect effect on gross primary production through the alteration of the communities. If we go to the next slide, we can see that drying is also very important to modulate greenhouse gas emissions, both CO2 and methane. Here you have some comparison of emissions of CO2 and methane for perennial, non-perennial rivers, or dry conditions or flowing conditions. And what is more striking here is to show in the upper middle part that the emissions of CO2, at least in dry river beds, are in magnitude are very similar to the ones that we can find in flowing or wet conditions. Okay, so this is very important. If we go to the next slide, because when we are considering the whole network, okay, not just reaches, but the whole network, and then we address or we try to figure out the contribution of the dry river beds to total emissions in a year, we can see that the contribution of dry river beds to total emissions can range from the 14 to the 77%, depending on the total extension of dry conditions in the river. So for instance, if we go to the Finnish network where we have just a very small drying, then this contribution can go around the 14%. But if we go to, for instance, to southern countries like Spain, where the dry conditions are way more important at the network scale, these emissions from dry sediments can be even over the 60% of the total emissions. So we need to consider this. We need to account for these emissions also from dry riverbeds that is not usually done at global models. Okay. So if we go to the last example, that is leaf-litter decomposition, if we go to the next slide, please, we can see, again, a very strong influence of drying on leaf-litter decomposition rates. What we can see in the left side of the plots is that drying in general creates or triggers a negative impact on decomposition. There is more drying, there is less decomposition, because obviously there is no water. The microbial decomposition will go slower, but also, and most importantly, if there is no water, there are not shredders, and therefore decomposition will decrease. Okay, and we can see that these patterns are consistent over the year. There is always always a lower decomposition in non-perennial rivers comparing to the perennial ones. So what are really the mechanisms here controlling decomposition rates? So again, as we saw for the metabolism, we are thinking of two potential ways, not the direct path of impact that can decrease decomposition because of the river is dry, but also the the indirect effect mediated through changes in the community, okay? And this, we are working at the network scale, so keep in mind that then we can not only focus on the dry conditions on the temporal side of drying, but also on the spatio-temporal connectivity of the network, how well the network is connected or fragmented depending on the drying condition at the network scale. Okay, so we go to the one of the last slides. We can see that we were analyzing these sort of mechanisms controlling decomposition through structural equation modeling. And here, what you can see is that drying, okay, both because of spatio-temporal connectivity, but also dry days, or the intensity of drying, creates a negative impact on decomposition in a direct way because of no water, the less decomposition, but also, and most importantly, the higher control happens through changes in the community, okay? So we see a decrease in the shredder abundance and therefore lower decomposition, and also a complete change in the microbial community composition that is going also to affect decomposition rates. And what is more striking, if we go to the next slide, is that the contribution, if this is the same model but split by non-perennial or perennial rivers, so non-perennial rivers above, and if we see the contribution of microbial communities versus shredders, we can see that the contribution of microbial communities to decomposition almost triplicates the importance of shredders control as driver of decomposition in non-perennial rivers. So what we are talking here is about drying is creating a shift in the control of the decomposition function from a more mediated control of shredders in perennial systems to a more microbial one dominated in non-perennial ones. Okay, so this is just the next slide is just to summarize. And I think I am already over the 10 minutes. So I will just to mention, as I was starting the presentation with, the drying, but still functioning. Okay, so non-perennial rivers do have a very unique functioning, and we need to consider this ecology into management to really proper manage well networks from a functional point of view. And thank you very much. And sorry for the problems of the audio.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jingyuan, and I'm presenting on behalf of Package 4, which is the ecosystem service of drying river networks. Well, here's the overview of our work. So we have three parts of the Package 4, which is conception model, the implication of ecosystem service, and also the valuation. Also, we collaborate with Package 5 on the preference and of NBS, which is nature-based solutions. Also, we have a introduction of our public engagement. So can we move to next slide, please? Yeah, so here is the regionalization of this conceptual model. So as Thibault mentioned in Package 4, that the river have a diverse response to drying, but within this conceptual model, we say okay, but the patterns of drying follows these patterns. So there are three key components of the ecosystem service, namely the intensity of abiotic flows, the biodiversity patterns, and the ecosystem functioning rates. And also we consider three functional unit of it, which is the headwater, the Piedmont area, and lowlands, and also three temporal period, which is the flowing period, non-flowing period, and dry phase. And sorry, can we go to the next page, please? On this page, we select one of the results here. So let's say for the vegetable biomass production, we can find out which component is rated here, and which is the SPA, which is the service provisioning area, service community area, and service benefit area, and also the spatial variation and the temporal variation. We can go to next page, please. So in the first part, we talk about the conceptual models, and this part we talk about the implementation of this ecosystem service. So here, 5 ecosystem service was selected. The first one is the water provisioning, and the rest 4 are the regulating ecosystem service. Can we go to the next page, please? So we are using the example of water provisioning results for the for this part. So on the figure on the right, you can find the regional patterns of water visioning during the pre-dry phase. And on the table on the left, you will find for the whole year and for different period of drying, how each rivers react. Next page, please. Okay, so the last, the second part, we talk about the implementation of ecosystem service, and now we talk about the valuation of this ecosystem service. The figure on the left told us the framework of this valuation. So like currently we have the river flowing, but if we are doing nothing, which is the business as usual scenario, that means in the future we don't have any flowing, we have a drying river. So to prevent such a drying, we need to have some mitigation intervention. That means we are preventing river from drying and get it back to flow. So this increases our social welfare, but also we need to take some actions, which is we have to pay for that. So if we have a look of the figure on the right, we found that there are 3 programs here, program A and B, and also no program. So the no program describes we are doing nothing. So the river will get dried, and of course we don't have any payment for that. And also for program A and B, that means the river is getting improved by some extent, but also we need to pay for that. So like we ask the respondents to pick the one they prefer, and it's actually they're trading off between how much improvement we want for the river and how much we need to pay for that. The next page, we present the part of the results here. Yep. So if we have, well, we focus on the first row here, that is the drying intensity, like how many euros people are going to pay for one less drying days here. So the first 3 columns are the case study, and the last 3 are the benefit transfer method. So you can find that for the Finland case, people are going to pay 2.75 euros for one less drying day, and this number reduced to 1.39 in the Hinel regions, and also reduced to 0.74 in the Hungary region. Can we go to the next page, please? So here is another part in the survey which contributes to work package 5 about the preference of nature-based solutions. So the methods is like, firstly, we identify which NBIs is suitable for different regions as there are different environmental concerns of local people. And also we ask the people to rank their NBIs and also states their acceptance of each NBI's measures. And also you are using some statistic tools of the preference. So the table on the right shows for each case which NBIs is being considered. You will find there are several variations here. Can we go to next page, please? Yeah, so here we have the part of our results of the preference of NBIs here. So the table on the left is about Hinao, and the table on the right is about the Bucosty. So you will find that the planting native tree species is both the top NBIs measures in these two regions, and this is the same for the Finland case. So that the change in the green wing are widely preferred in all the three cases, such as the planting native trees and forest management. But let's say the reintroducing of the middle streams is considered the least preferred NBIs of the three cases. Can we go to the next page, please? So here we have our public engagement. So when we are generating our surveys, we do get a lot of support from the local community. So you can find we have these workshops with local people in Spain, in Hungary, and in Finland. And also we have go to next page, please. We have in-person training sessions and co-construction workshop in Fortaleza with Professor Carla Renzendi. So a very pleasure period there. Also go to the next page, please. And also we are presenting what we get from our research to the local community. So the recent development is led by Julia in the Hinao regions to dissemination of our results to the Hinao village. Yeah, that's it for package 4. And Lisette, the floor is yours.
Hello, my name is Lisette de Senerpont Domis, and I'll be talking on behalf of Work Package 5 about co-creating of desired futures. As mentioned by Thibault before, Work Package 5 was an integrative transdisciplinary work package, so all the different data streams that were arising from Work Package 1 to 4 were supposed to come together. Our holy grail throughout the project was, what is a desired state for an intermittent river? And we, as with most holy grails, we didn't find the holy grail, but we tried to make do with what we got. Next slide, please. So managing the desired future for drying river networks is what we consider in socioecology a wicked environmental problem. That means that time is pressing and those seeking is often lacking, and this is what we saw during the co-creation workshops as well, that there were often different parts of the river being managed by different types of government bodies, and future policy is often postponed, and we see this as well in the context of drying river networks. Next slide, please. So one thing we came, which evolved in DRYvER or in the coming of DRYvER, was that nature-based solution could offer a fix for a wicked environmental problem. And as there are many misconceptions about nature-based solutions, I'll present you the IUCN criteria for nature-based solutions. And it's important to realize that nature-based solutions affect both societal challenges as well as biodiversity challenges. They always need to be economically viable, they need to be informed by scale, and they need to be managed adaptively. So adaptive management is always about finding almost like self-learning capacity based on models and monitoring tools. And of course, nature-based solutions are sustainable and mainstreamed within the appropriate jurisdictional context. Next slide, please. So importantly, as mentioned already, nature-based solutions link both ecological systems as well as socio-economical systems. So nature-based solutions are supposed to address both the socio-economic vulnerability of systems and the ecological vulnerability. Next slide, please. In an effort to get a better understanding what type of mitigation measures could be effective in drying river networks, the DRYvER team, led by Polono Bengal, made a catalog of all the different mitigation measures that are around that link to benefits to the water balance. So importantly, taking only one indicator, so the biophysical indicators of nature-based solutions, they zoomed into what are examples already of implementation and so on. Next slide, please. However, most of the evidence for nature-based solutions, the effectivity of nature-based solutions in mitigating drying is anecdotal or covered in white papers rather than peer-reviewed papers. So what we tried to do, because there was no capacity to model nature-based solutions in DRYvER, we tried to mitigate this knowledge gap by carrying out a systematic literature review on dose-effect relationship of restoration measures for mitigating drying. And by adopting the work package 4 functional spatial unit approach, we categorized measures that link to hydrological indicators, the type of hydrological indicators that were modeled on the DRN scale in work package 1. We categorized them based on river reach, riparian buffer, floodplain, and drainage wing. And we contextualized those for the questions that Jingyuan just explained about the effectiveness of the perceived effectiveness of nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. And then you see that there were quite some papers, but none of these papers. So we initially had about 170 papers mentioning nature-based solutions for mitigating drying, but only 23 of these papers actually gave some sort of quantitative evidence underpinning a dose-effect relationship between the implementation of a nature-based solution and the effect on hydrological parameters. So the evidence is very scarce. And examples of, for instance, a river reach, that there is quite some research done on beaver dams, for instance, that link to hydrological indicators. There's quite some evidence on land use change. There's not so much evidence on connectivity related to hydrological evidence, or we found actually zero evidence for that. Based in scientific literature. So most of the evidence links to, for instance, biodiversity metrics when we think about connectivity. Next slide, please. So we try to incorporate all of this knowledge in Bayesian belief networks. And we made Bayesian belief networks for each of the drying river network case study areas in Europe, where we linked the restoration measures, taking the dose-effective relationships that was arising from the papers, linked those to the hydrological variables that were modeled in work package 1, and tried to link those to an indicator of flow intermittence, so the number of flowing days on a month basis per reach, and link those to biodiversity metrics and restoration benefits, so work package 2 and work package 4 data. And what our BBN shows is that where the cascade model that is adopted by DRYvER needs improvement. So the evidence base for linking restoration measures to hydrological indicators is rather low. So it introduces a lot of uncertainty in this modeling framework. And then the evidence, and we're talking about reach and on a reach and a month scale, the evidence for between flow intermittence and biodiversity metrics is also rather low. And this introduces a lot of uncertainty in the predictive outcomes. Next slide, please. And now I would like to shift gears after telling you what the challenges are for nature-based solutions for mitigating drying. There's a lack of quantitative underpinning of effectivity for nature-based solutions for DRNs. And that is because the evidence base for socio-economical indicators, biophysical indicators, and sustainability indicators, as is part of the MBS framework, are currently scarce. Importantly, because we don't have a clear reference state for drying river networks, in the sense that what is it, how they should look like in an ideal world. And we also didn't find consensus among work packages in that. This was also a bit hampering our efforts. What we also saw is when in the co-creation sessions, and I'll talk a bit more about that later, that we see that there's a lack of clear non-conflicting governance structures. And there seems to be an under-perception of DRNs. And this is all challenging the implementation of nature-based solutions in mitigating drying. Next slide, please. So what we did in trying to move away from all these uncertainties and difficulties in implementing MBS, we tried in our co-creation workshop, and we organized almost 10 co-creation workshops, we tried to adopt a future forward thinking approach for DRNs. And the future forward thinking approach is a means to define a future that might be uncertain, pluralistic, but is focused on keeping good parts of the present. And here you see a paper by Bill Sharpe, because they use the Tree Horizon approach, where you can see where we are in terms of trying to create a desired future. So the approach we took is not so much forecasts. So forecasts typically take place on a very fine temporal scale, 1 to 5 days or so, or explorative scenarios that work package 1 was, for instance, showing. We were actually focusing on pathways and using these pathways to backcast to the present. And elements of these pathways are always that you are operating an area with a lot of uncertainty, but quite a high agency, because it's us that define these pathways. Next slide, please. So because we were dealing with underperception in stakeholder communities, we're always set the stage together with the case study providers in adopting a future forward thinking approach. And that means that you should be open to alternatives, long-term perspective. You should focus on actionable perspective, system knowledge, and open to other people's interest. And importantly, these co-creation workshops, they were not only co-creating with stakeholders, but also co-creating with the people of Work Package 4 and Work Package 5. And it allowed us to understand each other's epistemologies and overcome semantic barriers in thinking. Next slide, please. So what we did is that we developed a standardized approach, which we consistently applied across the 6 European DRNs and also in Brazil. And what we did is we authorized the Nature Futures framework of the Intergovernmental Panel for Biodiversity and Ecosystem Services using this Tree Horizon approach for Bill Sharpe. And we always ask people, as a starting to create a safe space, we ask people what their perspective on nature was. What are the values they have for nature? Are these intrinsic values? Are these instrumental values? Or are these relational values? Next slide, please. So then we explain people the sustainability of the current approach, so business as usual. So you see that these values, these intrinsic values, instrumental values, and relational values, they will decrease over time. And we contrast those with, next slide, please, the desired future. And the desired future is always a future that evolves around transformative change, so not incremental change. Next slide, please. And we always started our workshops with asking people to both from a professional view as well as for a personal individual view to position themselves in this Nature Futures framework. So here you see some examples, and we always felt that although the perception of nature might be different, so what is the intrinsic value of nature is different for a fisherman versus a farmer, for instance, that the room for negotiation was actually quite high, because people often ended up, as you can see here, for instance, as well, quite high or in the middle of this diagram. Next slide, please. And to conclude, because I only have a little bit of time, I'd like to share with you some of the major outcomes of these co-creating desired futures approaches we did. So what we saw across DRNs, that there is a need for improved education and awareness raising, and there's a need for better and more DRN relevant monitoring data. So often in the DRNs, there was monitoring data available, but this was often not relevant to drying river networks. And often not at a temporal spatial scale that would allow for adaptive management. Then furthermore, almost unanimously across DRNs, we see a need for clear, non-conflicting and transparent governance structures. So we see, for instance, that upstream is managed differently from downstream, that the areas adjacent, so what we would call the drainage wing of the floodplain, are managed by a different authority than the river itself. And often we perceived that, or we were fed by the stakeholders that this was the first time they actually had a conversation about the drying river network. So that is already a major achievement in terms of co-creating, I would say. Importantly, the drying risk was less perceived than the flood risk. So the flood risk was always seen as a bigger problem than drying itself. And almost without exemption, drying was always amplified by anthropogenic activities. So during the co-creation sessions, there were also always we always got more clarity about, for instance, illegal water abstraction activities and so on. Then things that were DRN specific. And that is also apparent from the surveys that were carried out in work package in collaboration between work package 4 and 5. We saw that the preferred nature-based solutions were always contextualized to local conditions. So, for instance, if you think about river reach management, then you would think about increasing the infiltration capacity of the catchment and slowing down, for instance, the river. And you see that in some areas, this is done by putting boulders in rivers. In some areas, this would be preferred through a re-meandering construction. The type of stakeholder conflicts were also very DRN specific. And what we saw as well, which was interesting for me, also quite surprising, that there was both an overuse and an underuse of the river network. So there was some areas that received a lot of anthropogenic activities. But for instance, the river network in Croatia is underused, and that is also a challenge for adaptive management, because you tend then to be forgotten by government bodies. And what is DRN specific was the preferred reference state of the DRNs. There was very different opinions about what was the preferred state of a DRN. And with that, I would like to conclude and thank you for your attention.
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for still being with us. And in the next some minutes, I would like to briefly introduce you to the citizen science initiative of the DRYvER, the DRYRivERS. That is a well-known fact that we still do not have enough records on the hydrological conditions and the drying patterns of the small stream sections. And we established the citizen science project to aid this a little bit and to map and monitor these intermittent sections of the streams and recording the timing of these drying events. And it has two different goals. First, to raise awareness on this increasingly severe issue, and of course to collect crucial data for research purposes on these unmonitored stream sections. Next slide, please. Thank you. This project has 3 different parts. The first one is the smartphone application, which is exclusively designed for field data recording. This only knows this function, but on the simplest and the most professional way. And when you go to the field, you can record very easily the hydrological condition of the streams using this application, and it is available in 23 languages, so you can use it all over the world, and you can choose your preferred language. And the second part is the web application, which is integrated to the project website, and you can access it using this web address. And this is practically a database and a real-time data visualization system. If you visit this website, you can see immediately all the records what we already have. And if you log in with your username, the same username what you can use for the smartphone application, you can edit your own records, you can upload new records, you can download all of them, and you can search within the records, and you can use filter system for time periods or spatial areas, and of course you can see some statistics. And the third part is the supporting web page and the social media pages. And of course, we have a lot of files, including tutorials and how to document and some suggestions and posters. All of them are to help the users how to use the applications and how to manage their records. The majority of these documents are mostly in English, but there are also some other languages what you can use for. Next slide, please. Okay, how does it work? As I told you, the mobile application is very easy to use. There are some very easy steps to follow. Adding a new record takes no more than 20 seconds for experienced users. When you're walking in a forest and find a stream and you want to record it, you just start the application. Your GPS will locate the site, or you can do it manually if you prefer. And then you have to select the hydro status. It can be flow, disconnected, pause, or dry. When you select it, you can name the site if it's a new one. Of course, you can add new records to already existing sites. Then you can take a photo. It's strongly recommended to take a photo, and then you can save the records, and you can upload immediately if you have internet connection, or you can do it later if you get back to the civilization. Next slide, please. Okay, how many users and records we already have? We have more than 3,000 registered users. As always, majority of them have never submitted any single records, but we have hundreds of users who are continuously reporting, and they collected records from more than 5,800 spots all over the world, and we have more than 13,000 records from 40 countries. As you can see on the lower part of the slide, that in this 3 area, the app is the most popular in Hungary, in Czechia, and in southeastern France. These are those regions where we had an extensive advertisement of this application and the citizen science project, and there are colleagues who spread the word successfully in these countries. The next slide, please. If you log into the website or just visit it and zoom on an area, you can see all the records and all the spots which is recorded in this area. And if you select a spot, you can see all the records what we have and what is available from that site. You can see the status, you can see the photos, and you can have access to anything. And if it is your own record, you can have the right to edit it or modify it a little bit. Next slide, please. If you want, you can download the records. You can download all of them. You can download your group records. You can download your own records if you want, and it's completely free. The next slide, please. If you are interested in or curious what is happening in a time period, a specific time period, you can use the filters. This is my favorite function of this application, the time machine. You can select time intervals, hydro condition types, user groups, or you can combine them, and you can practically filter all the data, and you can tailor your map according to your needs, and you also have a possibility to see the statistics of this selected period. The next slide, please. Okay, we have different types of users. Almost all of the users can do everything if log in to the web app, but there are a very specific group of users. We call them collective account user or the org members. If you are a part of an NGO or you are collecting records together with your colleagues, you can ask the administrators that they can create for you an org. And if you are an org member, you have additional rights to download the org records, you can edit the org records, and you can manage your records separately to the other records. The next slide, please. To keep the users and to engage them that this is a good thing and they should stay with us, we implemented a gamification. All the users can collect points when recording the data. And if you are collecting enough points, your level in this game can be increased a little bit. All the users start as a novice, but if you collect enough points, you can reach the levels of Pathfinder, Wizard, Master, Expert, Exemplar, and finally you can be Poseidon. And the ultimate goal is being a Poseidon in this game. And I have to advertise that we still do not have Poseidon, so you still have a chance to be Poseidon in this story. We defined also some permanent challenges and also some specific ones. For example, if you collect most of the records in a week, if you collect most records on the water day or the Easter period, you can pass this challenge and then you can earn a badge. And in this badging system, you can see on the right of the slide that you can collect a lot of badges, and there are some extra points which will be also awarded to the user if passing a challenge. So you can increase your scores and you can reach to the next levels. Next slide, please. Okay, you can use your personal statistics on your user profile, your own statistics, your own spots, earn badges, and your actual level. And you can also follow your push notification messages, which is sent by the administrators. And you can follow everything what is happening with you in this story. The next slide, please. Okay. You can also find on the website the Hall of Fames and the basic statistics. The Hall of Fames list all the most active users by spots and the most active users by records. And you can also check the most active or most popular spots which are holding the highest number of records. And of course, if you are filtering the data to a specific time period, you can also have these statistics for the specific time period too. The next slide, please. Okay, and I have very last suggestions for you. Please download the app today and collect the records with us. And in the name of all the speakers, I would like to thank you very much for your kind attention. And now I would like to pass the word to Thibault, who will moderate the question and answer section of this event. Thank you.
Yes, thanks, Zoltán. Thanks, everyone, for the great presentation. So in the audience, now to keep things manageable, you cannot use a microphone to ask a question, but you can use the chat. So the idea is we have, let's say, half an hour to discuss questions, to discuss perspective. You may want to know more on some aspect that we've been presenting or about the future aspect or whatever. So please use the chat to raise any question you may have. And that's true for each of the presentation that were given today. While some of you are perhaps thinking, don't be shy. Huh? Any point is good to discuss. Just to mention that some of the activities that will go beyond driver, we have lots of data, so you can imagine that we are still going to make lots of analysis. What we also did is to use all the samples that were collected in the field they've been processed through meta-barcoding. So that was not planned in the project, but we managed to find additional funding to do so. So we will also have this for work package 2, for example, the analysis, but based on molecular operational taxonomic unit that may also allow us perhaps to detect new insight of the meta-community dynamics in this river network. There are some work on extrapolating the map that was produced by Mathis Messager in 2021 towards the future. So that's led by Petra, by Madi, Mathis, etc. What else for the functions? There are lots of analysis being done, and I guess 5, 6 papers to be produced in the coming months. Same for package 4 and 5. I'm just talking randomly while people are, so don't be shy. I see no question. Perhaps you have no question, and we may close now. Margot, do you see, or perhaps I'm not looking on the right aspect? Is the chat or the Q&R?
There are no questions.
There is one. I can see. Yes, there is one. Lisette, please explain the different desire states that stakeholders hold and what desire states do the researcher, ecologist, and other hold? That's a good question.
Yeah, so the desired states that ecologists and others hold, that depends on what type of ecologist they are, to be honest. If we look at the type of ecologist that I'm leading, the team that I'm leading, the desired state have to resonate with the current legislative and policy forces. And then we're talking primarily about the Natural Restoration Law, the Water Framework Directive, and then the Nature Directive, so the Habitat and Bird Directive. And I know it's very interesting to study bacteria, but that is not of the prime interest of managers often. And maybe it should be, for good reasons. We questioned the desired state amongst the different scientists within the DRYvER project, and there was no clear-cut answer. And we see also that there's different reference states used throughout the project. In terms of the stakeholders, it really depended where you were at. So sometimes the desired state was very much related to specific ecosystem services, such as swimming. So the desired state would then be more towards having more perennial rivers. If you have more what I would call people in the nature area, then the desired state always had to do with some form of rewilding activity. So it really depends, I would say. Yeah, I don't know if that answers your question, but I would say it's very contextualized. And the type of ecosystem services that were dominant, so I'm not talking about the modeling of the ecosystem, but were preferred in, or were spoken about, or were relevant in the DRNs, were very different as well. And with the most extreme, perhaps, the Croatian case study area, which is virtually a very pristine area until it's not, until the city of Nin, then it becomes very unpristine. So half of the catchment is pristine, half of it is not. And there you had there people actually had, they had a connection with the river, but it was very underused connection, I would say. Yeah.
Thanks. So there are more questions now. So yeah, the reference question is also actually a question for the Water Framework Directive, and you may know that there's some discussion about what shall we change the reference, because in 20 years the communities, they have changed due to climate change. Blah. So that's an interesting question without a simple response. So indeed, Maria, for the modeling, and we could complement that, but we did not use remote sensing, but we used flow gauging station, observation from the citizen science effort that Zoltán have shown, and other citizen science effort, and also photo trap. That's the 3 types of data that were used. Remote sensing in our case was not really relevant because the streams, they do not show up on the satellite images. Louise?
Actually, just for the renal catchment in Spain, remote sensing could be used to actually monitor when the ridges were dry or flowing, because the vegetation is very scarce there.
Yeah, Mediterranean. Yeah, that's good. Another question about the driver app. That's for Zoltán. What is the future of this large and very valuable data set? Can you continue to maintain? Yes, and Zoltán is giving detail on that.
Yeah, for sure, we can maintain the site and the data collection for 3 years at least. And after these 3 years, we are working on the solution, how to move this valuable data set to a bigger hub or to pass it to a bigger project. So, of course, we can maintain the data collection, and all the data will be used in the future and will be available in the future.
Yeah, it's basically secure for 4 years, let's say. And then the aim, and maybe there are some people attending from the GRC, we are trying to get this merged with the fragmentation database of dams that has been produced at the European level. So there is kind of an effort to join forces on temporary and permanent fragmentation, temporary by drying and permanent by dams, and to have this on a much secure. Anyway, we know that we will find money to keep this up for 5, 10, 15 years, because there is so much interest in science, but not only in science. You could read the paper about the app, but it has been used a lot for educational purposes, to organize discussion with stakeholders. It's being used by different stakeholders in France, for example, and also in Hungary. I see another question about the hydrological model, and the response, again, Louise will say, but no, we cannot model the presence of pool for many different reasons. But the first of one is that we don't have the data. A flow gauging station is not able to tell you there is a pool. Photo trap could, and then there's the type of model. So perhaps, Louise, you want to say more, but no, we were not able, and I'm not sure this is easily done at the DRN scale to monitor pool.
Yeah, so not just to complement, it's not that it's not technically feasible for the hydrological modeling. It's just that as we use hybrid models that relies on algorithms that are trained with observations, we need enough observation of the pool state to train the model. And for our study cases, it was not the case yet, but maybe in a few years, with enough collected data, it would be possible.
Yeah, and so we have to keep in mind that pools are not always there. In many sites, for example, in the Alberine, the pools, they stay 2 days and then they dry up, because the depending on what is the processes leading to drying, the pool can be very ephemeral, so they are not acting as any refuge. So it could be relevant in some cases, but not in other. And when relevant, as we say, we don't have the data. We really need people to monitor the extent, the persistence, etc. That's difficult. There is another question, probably for you, or maybe for Petra, or both of you. What is the ENSO influence on hydrological model to predict for intermittence, Louise?
So I wouldn't know exactly how to respond to that, because that's not something that we specifically looked at. So no, sorry, I don't have much to say about that. I don't know if Petra has more.
Petra said ENSL, she wrote. I don't know what that means, sorry. But ENSL. And because Petra cannot talk, okay. ENSO impact climate variable answers the modeling results.
I can open Petra's mic if needed.
Yeah, maybe. Petra, if you want to give some word about the influence of ENSO.
Okay, you can speak, Petra.
Petra, if you want, you can. If you don't want, no problem. Okay, but never mind, never mind. There is some impact, but nobody is, yeah, we don't hear you, sorry. That's fine. While perhaps you fix your microphone or you want to give more detail by the chat, Maria is commenting, that's not a question, that water level measurement are not correlated to flow, ponding, dry conditions. That's an issue. I guess that's also depend on the system, because in the one we have studied, generally water level was linked to the presence of flow or dry condition. Ponding is another story, of course. Another question? Let's allow 2 more minutes, and I don't know, I will try to say something. If you have perhaps a last question, we were planning to close in 1 minute anyway, so that's maybe a sign that you may go back to your project. So just to say that DRYvER was an incredible adventure. As you see, it was really, really interdisciplinary, which is nice, but also really time consuming, because we need to have common narrative, common experience on what is drying, etc. So it took us of time. You also need to remember that we started DRYvER with the COVID, so we had to wait 2 years to meet. So when you have a group of like 100 plus people and you only communicate by emails or by Zoom, I can tell you that it's a challenge to really make a team, but we succeeded finally, and that was quite a successful project, as you have seen. A very last question. Is there any collaboration among the Indian subcontinent teams? Well, the response is quite easy. You've seen the talk, so no, there was no. At the moment, that was primarily due to the fact that the funding was restricted to some countries. So on the call, which we applied for, we were instituted to collaborate with people from South America, but not from the Indian continent. It may be the case in the future. I know that the problem with the water quality was we do have colleagues in Europe working with people in India, not specifically on drying, but more on plastic contamination, on floodplain alteration, led by Hervé Piguet, etc. Perhaps you know. Yeah, Maria, thanks to you. So that's time to say first a big thank to all the DRYvERians. That was a very, very big group of people. Thanks to the people who led nicely the work package. Thanks to the European Commission and to our project officer. And I know he was here, he perhaps is still here. So we had lots of support. That was really, really nice. We still have our final reviewing next week, I think, or in 2 weeks. And then we will start thinking about future projects and finish, of course, write up all the papers that are waiting. There are probably 20 or 30 papers that are on our desk. So stay tuned. You will see the more DRYvER news. Thanks to all the people who attended. I think we're almost 100 people this afternoon, 90 people, I think. So that was really nice. Thanks for your attention. Thanks to all the speakers, and hope to meet you in the near future in any research project focusing on drying rivers. Have a nice day. Thanks, everyone.